Located on what's now the 12-acre site of an early 20th century art colony for tonalist impressionist painters, the Florence Griswold Museum opened to the public in 1947. Situated in a small Connecticut town called Old Lyme on Long Island Sound, the museum originally consisted of the late Georgian home of Florence Griswold, matron of the art colony, whose members lived in her boarding house, painted in her gardens and pastures, paddled their canoes on the Lieutenant River near the property, and frolicked on her front lawn. And actually, I meant to ask before I started, how many of you here have been to the museum? Okay, a few. All right, so good. Everybody should come. The artists made themselves at home when they were visiting from New York or Boston. They lounged on the front steps in the yard. They took over ramshackle farm sheds and converted the barns for use as studios, complete with skylights. And their paintings, including the absolutely unique examples that were done on the walls and doors of the first floor of the Griswold house, as well as historic photographs, films, and things from the museum's archives, all record for us the landscape that they so loved, with its lush, if shaggy vegetation, colorful heirloom flowers, mature fruit trees, and open fields. Okay. But despite the bonds of affection between Miss Florence and the artist that prompted them to create things like the remarkable dining room paintings, Florence lacked significant financial resources and struggled with money, particularly during the Great Depression of the 1930s, and you can see the effect that that took on the back wing of her house. To pay her debts and create resources for the care of the elderly Miss Florence, who by then was in her 80s, a conservator appointed by the court required that her property be sold just a year before she died in December 1937. To try to save the house, her artist friends went into action, as a newspaper clipping shows, soliciting financial support through a national campaign as well as through personal donations. But ultimately, they were outbid by a New York judge, Robert McCurdy Marsh, who built a country home overlooking the Lieutenant River on what had once been Miss Florence's vegetable fields. Thankfully, he allowed Miss Florence to live out her days in the home where she was born in 1850, and on December 6, 1941, a few years after he'd been occupying his house, he sold the Griswold home and a small margin of land around it to the artists, who intended to preserve it as a museum. And just to give you a sense, that little highlighted portion is her home and the museum within the context of the larger property. The artist's plan took an important step forward in 1947 after World War II, when the institution opened to visitors, but for decades the museum operated on its very small plot. And just so we have continuity of people dancing, this is the kind of programming that used to be sort of jammed into the front yard of the home between that and Route 1, a busy local street. Through decades of work by the artists, their descendants, the museum's directors, trustees, staff, and the community, the museum gradually brought back the estate, restoring access to the riverfront in the mid-1990s. You can see this where everything suddenly turns green. That represents that transition. And then in 2016, we purchased the last original parcel remaining in private hands. So you can see on the last slide, now suddenly that little missing piece is gone. And I should just explain about the lower corner that's still white. That's land that Florence actually sold to the Lyme Art Association so that the artist could build a gallery for the display of her work. So we don't want that back. So they got back this land, and the consolidation of the estate enabled the museum to consider how to augment the physical experience of our landscape, which first attracted artists to town to paint outdoors in 1899. The Robert F. Schumann Artist Trail opens in July 2019, and for the first time it'll provide visitors with a comprehensive experience of our landscape from artistic, historical, and environmental perspectives. Right now it's covered with bulldozers, so trust me, these renderings look better than what you'll see until everything's done. The opportunity to do something big to steward, preserve, and present our historic artist's home and studio has coincided with a shift that similar sites have been confronting in the past decade. Namely, artists' homes are facing the pressing issue of visitors seeking immersive experiences that link art and the environment, and the visitors have growing expectations for environmental sensitivity and sustainability. To adapt, the museum's Artist Trail honors and restores the Griswold estate's agrarian character and addresses issues of accessibility and environmental amelioration with an eye toward both the visitor experience and the stewardship and preservation of our riverside site. And I'm showing you a historic painting of the Griswold property by the artist Greg Smith, one of many made by artists of the colony during visits just after the turn of the 20th century. And you can see that it records a different working landscape, much more workaday than the one that we've lived with over the past few decades as this kind of tranquil site on the Lieutenant River. This is taken in 2016. To give you a sense of further contrast, in the colony years, grass was really only mown short in front of the Griswold house, and you can see there's this very overgrown aesthetic around the property in the colony years. In subsequent decades, suburban-style lawns replaced farm fields and orchards. Bowers, like the one shown on the right by Rita Longacre, and hedgerows that harbored birds, insects, and small animals were all diminished, as was overall environmental quality. At the same time, the ecological features have always been there. Our community is still sort of semi-rural, suburban, and so they're only waiting to be nurtured, including our riverside site's importance as a flyaway for migrating birds. In fact, the legendary naturalist Roger Torrey Peterson, who revolutionized bird watching by emphasizing how people could look at birds and study them through his Peterson field guides, lived just up the river from the museum within sight. In 2006, the museum completed a restoration of the Florence Griswold house that included the introduction of period rooms, which I'm showing you here, offering an experience of the art colony at its height, circa 1910. And these are rooms in which we use some of Florence's original possessions, most of which were sold at auction in 1938, and then they're mixed with things that we realized she had or have found similar examples of from photographs and works of art. At the same time, interest intensified in extending that concept to the landscape as well, and a limited number of heritage apple trees were planted on the site of Miss Florence's original orchard, which is seen here in a painting by Lucian Abrams. This initiative followed an earlier effort to restore Miss Florence's historic garden based on paintings and photographs once that piece of the original property was regained in the 1990s. And you can see volunteers installing that garden based on evidence from paintings and then how it looks today. Each of these incremental changes signaled the commitment the museum has long had to link history with landscape and art. At the same time, the necessity of bringing in the environmental piece has in recent years really come to the fore as the museum has undergone a process of master planning and along with that developing a new landscape master plan. That process is centered on a commitment to recapture the estate's original DNA by merging art, history, and ecology. We hope to provide visitors with a more authentic sense of why the artists were drawn to our site and how they interacted with the land. Stephen Stimson, Landscape Architects of Cambridge, Mass., a leading landscape architecture firm in this country, developed a transformative landscape master plan that's helped to re-envision the entire 12-acre site by reclaiming its agrarian past of hedgerows, cart paths, riverfront meadows, and woodland thickets, which were lost over years of subdivision and development. And this is a kind of section of that hedgerow path and some of those meadows. Stimson describes the museum's grounds as beautiful but fractured, with elements not always true to the historic artist's experience. Their plan helps tell the artist's story and provides ecological function, all while directing a cohesive exploration of the grounds. Inspiring visitors to engage in ways that are historically, educationally, and ecologically relevant has induced us to build the Artist Trail with areas for learning, gathering, and observing nature, with reference also to the art that it inspired. ADA accessible trails will lead visitors from the museum's Kriebel Gallery, which is a changing exhibition space opened in 2002, and go all around our site to a river walk along the banks of the Lieutenant River, through historic gardens, up the hedgerow, which you can see again at the bottom, to the Griswold house, and into a woodland walk along a small stream. The trail offers interpretations of historic structures and natural elements, engaging visitors with the landscape via a new boardwalk, which is in the top slide, a wildlife overlook on the river, which you can also see there, and bird boxes for nesting. This evocative interpretation of the site's historic and ecological relevance, in conjunction with its artistic beauty, offers an experience rarely found in the museum world, with the exception perhaps of the kind of properties that we all work at. At the site of the American Impressionist Child Hassam's studio on our grounds, we've recreated the building's footprint to create a kind of landscape room, and I've highlighted it with an arrow here because it's very subtly integrated into the site. It's made with indigenous stone and indigenous plantings, and it'll be used as a gathering spot for field trips and lecture audiences for whom it will be an outdoor classroom. At the same time, the suggestion of the studio through this footprint alone, rather than a taller structure, preserves the sense of bucolic open space. So we chose not to actually rebuild the studio, and you can see it as it appeared in the 1930s. In a thrilling development, Hassam's own painting of his studio, which also inspired other artists of the colony, has recently entered our collection, offering exciting options for future programming both outdoors and indoors. And here we even have a photograph of him on our site painting this very painting by the studio. As we've developed and implemented the landscape plan, the objective has been to craft something that respects the site's history as both an agrarian estate and as a communal art colony, while maintaining our functionality as a museum. In keeping with best practices, we've adhered to a less is more approach, allowing the site's natural beauty to express itself on its own terms. We've also sought to develop designs that make a somewhat fractured property feel integrated and reinvested with a sense of its own history, combined with a progressive and environmentally sensitive and visibly environmentally sensitive ethic. In keeping with new commitments in our field, we also apply and will be applying green practices to become more sustainable in terms of water and energy uses, while promoting a thriving ecosystem for birds, plants, and animal life. Ultimately, these changes to our landscape site have helped amplify a long-time strategy of connecting our visitors with the inspiration felt by artists who visited Old Lyme, loving it enough to actually preserve the Griswold house, turn it into a museum, and in our second floor galleries of the Griswold house, we exhibit paintings of the site like the ones that you see here, treating them as sort of windows through the wall, but also windows onto what until now has been a kind of lost landscape, and allowing visitors to see what the artist saw and admired about the property. In the Griswold Gallery, our special or changing exhibition program has been building on our collection strength in landscape painting by responding to the environmental turn in American art history through shows exploring that theme in 19th and 20th century paintings and contemporary art. This summer, our major exhibition will be called Fragile Earth, the Naturalist Impulse in Contemporary Art, and opening June 1st, it will feature the work of contemporary artists Jennifer Angus, Mark Dion, Courtney Madison, and James Prozek, who draw attention to the environment's beauty and vulnerability through their use of materials such as preserved insects, ocean plastics, or prints made with eels' bodies. Several of their works extend the tradition of creativity on our site by responding to the property's natural features and to the history of the art colony. A remarkable aspect will be Jennifer Angus's intervention in the Florence Griswold house, the first time we've done something like this, where she'll use preserved insects arranged in Victorian geometric patterns or cavorting under glass domes in little vignettes, filling up cabinets of curiosity, all to tell a tale about an insect-themed party staged by Miss Florence's artist boarders. Angus's creation will buzz through visitors' minds as they go back outdoors to the artist trail, enchanted and informed about the wondrous but also precarious state of the environment, improved a bit, we hope, by the restorations we've introduced through our artist trail. Looking ahead, we anticipate the second phase of our landscape master plan, which would coincide with a hoped-for addition to our Griswold Gallery, creating additional collection and archive space. Our historic artist's home, presented circa 1910, offers a means of telling the Lyme art colony story, while the Griswold Gallery has presented changing exhibitions. Although these often draw on the permanent collection, we're hoping that additional gallery space would allow us to show more of that collection on a long-term basis, as well as to highlight our archive about the art colony and local history. During the second phase of the landscape plan, which you can see sort of sketched out on the screen, the trail network will be extended around into a loop that will traverse a restored meadow on the property, on the part that we recovered in 2016. That meadow will become the home or new home of the Chadwick studio, the American Impressionist William Chadwick. His studio was moved from his home in town to the museum site and opened in 1993. And it was moved there as an example of the kinds of small studios artists occupied on Florence's property, which mostly did not survive. This second phase of the landscape will also include additional ecological improvements, including the good that will be done by a stormwater swale we've installed to help filter rainwater before it moves into the Lieutenant River. And in the future, even our parking area will become one of those mechanisms for environmental improvement. We'll introduce more porous surfaces and walls of thicket plants to filter runoff and create an authentic sense of place, but also habitat for animals. As with any significant change, we're going to be meeting visitors' articulated needs, but also creating new ones that will shape our site, as have past developments. Our phased rollout of the Artist Trail will offer rich and engaging ways to experience art, history, and nature on our site, but we fully anticipate honing how those experiences are crafted for our visitors through programs outdoors, through interpretive texts, and through technology. Rather than a culmination, something that we finished and see being in place for years to come, we're building in flexibility through this phasing so that we can test and adapt the trail, tweaking it for visitors' use and engagement. An ongoing and dynamic endeavor that we feel mirrors in many ways the way that Florence Griswold herself evolved the landscape as she transitioned it from farm to art colony in the early 20th century. Thank you.